Welcome to the Birth Squad, the podcast designed to empower birthing individuals with real insights from two Black female physicians. We're here to guide you through your health journey, one episode at a time. I'm Dr. Kamisha Thomas.
And I'm Dr. Ijalma Bello. We are two OBGYNs and longtime best friends, and we're here to help navigate you through the world of reproductive health.
Real women, real stories, real experts, and the facts you need to know.
Tune in every other Sunday, and don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe.
Ready to join the squad? Let's get into it. Well, welcome back, Birth Squad fam. Can you believe it? It's the final episode of season 3.
Yes, and this episode is powerful and an important conversation about shoulder dystocia, which is a rare but serious birth complication that happens when a baby's shoulder gets stuck behind the mother's pelvic bone during delivery. It's a moment that no one plans for, but it can be incredibly intense for everyone involved.
Today, we're joined by the incredible Perlita Ortega, who's a working mom of 2, bravely sharing her personal experience with shoulder dystocia. Her story is raw, real, and full of insight.
This is definitely one of those episodes that sticks with you, but we also wanted to let our listeners know this conversation includes birth trauma that may be triggering for some. So listener discretion is advised.
We're so grateful to Perlita for opening up. So let's get into it. Good morning and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Squad podcast. I am extremely honored to introduce our next guest. She is a long-term friend of mine, all the way back to high school, Perlita Ortega Madrid. Thank you for joining us on the Birth Squad, Perlita.
Thank you, and good morning to both of you. I'm so excited to be here and so proud of you both, so I'm excited.
Yes. Well, why don't we start by having you introduce yourselves and share a little bit about who you are with the listeners.
Yeah, so I am Perlita, and I have known Kamisha since high school. I'm as it pertains to the podcast, a mom of 2, a 4-year-old little girl and a 15-month-old boy, and I am tired, and they are keeping me very busy. They are wild. They're so fun. Their personalities are starting to shine through more and more each day. A mom of 2, toddler check. I'm a wife to a great husband, and I'm a professional. I work in the corporate world. I'm in leadership, been at a job in tech for about 12 years, and that keeps me very significantly busy, with my family, career. And then I'm also a daughter, and I have parents that are aging and spending a lot of time with our family too. So we're very family-oriented family.
That's so great. Can you tell us, Perlita, a little bit about your path to motherhood?
Yeah, but it was, 2020. We wanted to start trying like a year after we got married. We took like the final Euro trip as a couple. Remember, we booked 10 days in 2000, at the end of 2018, because we had got married earlier in the year. And, we thought after this trip, we're going to get pregnant. That didn't happen right away. It took like about 13 months of us trying, several doctor's appointments, and my doctor being very much aware that it was probably maybe my stress levels. Her reaction was always like, calm down first. I was going to take a sabbatical from work. And so she was highly encouraging that sabbatical because I think I was under just a lot of stress. So ours was, not unique, right? So it's the same story as so many couples, but it would definitely was unusual then to start to vocalize, to some family members like, no, we're trying. It's just not happening, so it was kind of a difficult thing. I remember then I was at the phase where I was starting to get emotional when I would find out that other people were getting pregnant so easily. But the truth is, as soon as we kind of like gave up, threw up my arms, and was like preparing to take a sabbatical the following year, 2020. So there's a lot to that, right? I kind of gave up, and we're like, well, it'll happen if it happens. If not, I'll spend some time during my sabbatical going to the doctors and trying to explore what could be happening. And we found out we were pregnant December 2019. So it was right around the time that I was like, I give up. I give up, like not having to go to the doctors and checking on what could be happening. It did feel like it happened pretty much when we had the just took a deep breath and realized that maybe we might have to go a different route. So I felt really blessed that was the case. And then we, found out we were pregnant December 2019. And then, we found out very shortly in early 2020 that our pregnancy journey would not be like the same as others because then COVID hit. And my husband, for example, was only ever able to go to the very first appointment. After that, it was restricted and I had to do it kind of alone. And he'd be in the parking lot every single time, just waiting until I came out, just still as emotional support. So that was its own kind of journey in itself, being pregnant, right, in 2020, which I know anyone who was pregnant during COVID had to go through the same things.
Yeah, it was a very unique time. And it's unfortunate that that was your first experience, you know? So tell us a little bit about, okay, your pregnancy was a little bit different because you didn't have the support system that you would have liked in every appointment. What did your delivery experience end up looking like? Can you walk us through that?
So like for my birth, honestly, I was never one to have a really elaborate birth plan. I knew one thing, which was that I wanted to have painkillers and medicine, and I wanted to feel very, very as little as possible. And he was going to be the only one allowed in there. So, the journey was that like we got to the hospital. I had to go in first and get the COVID test and get the clear. And also, by the way, we were having lunch in Culver City on a Sunday afternoon. I was like, I think something feels off. I'd found like I was like 4 days late, right from past my due date. So I was just like, something feels off. Maybe let's go get checked out. Like maybe I'm leaking a little bit. And then when the nurse was like, okay, yeah, we're gonna admit you. And I was like, what does that mean? And she was like, that you're leaving here with the baby. And I just immediately started to cry because I was like, that's not what I thought was gonna happen today at all. I don't know why. I was already 4 days past due, highly uncomfortable. But that happened, and then we had to call Sam up, and I did the testing. Then he had to get the test done in order to be cleared to even come into the room. So all of like the fact that like we kind of had to do it separately but together allowed for us to have so many conversations leading up, especially knowing that, and I love it. Love that it's been this way, but like it's really, even in my second birth, I chose that it was only going to be him and I in the room. And mostly because I think we felt really good about the way that it went the first time around. It gets scary, right? We'll talk about that, but I felt really good that it was just him and I. And like we had the discussions, like if things get scary, who do we focus on in the family? And like the truth is, I've always had both times I've had a like if things get scary in there, like the priority is like the nucleus of our family, which is him and myself and Sam, right? Like we have to focus on getting me safe first and foremost. And like even when we had the second one, that conversation was, I'm gonna get emotional, was even harder because now there was a little one involved. But the second time I was very much like, if it's me or a baby, like we have to talk about these things, and like these kids, like, she needs her mom, right? So we've had that conversation twice, and we get emotional every single time we talk about it because we are talking about a third, and we have to like talk about these things, because we all know how scary it can get for some women, especially of some minorities in the room. So like we have to have these very open conversations, and we do, and those are the type of conversation we've had. I was just trying to survive in 2020. Truthfully, everyone was just trying to survive.
So Perlita was pregnant during the height of COVID, which must have added a whole extra layer of stress.
Absolutely. Being pregnant is already a really vulnerable time, but during a global pandemic, woo. Let's put this into context. 1, there's limited in-person appointments. 2, there's no support people allowed. 3, there's constantly shifting hospital protocols. It is a lot.
When it came to her birth plan, Perlita wasn't trying to be fancy or overly specific. She had 2 main goals: pain control and safety. That's it. She wanted to feel secure in her environment, and she wanted to be able to maintain the pain as effectively as possible.
And for some people, especially in uncertain times like a pandemic, simplicity is power. Perlita's plan was just about survival and self-advocacy.
And what's wild is, even with that clear and simple plan, birth still had its own agenda. That's what makes her story so important. It reminds us how unpredictable birth can be and how crucial it is to be mentally and emotionally prepared for the unexpected.
Yes, and I think a lot of our listeners, especially Black and Brown mamas navigating the medical system that oftentimes don't prioritize our safety, Perlita's story is a reminder that your voice and your plan, they matter, even when things take a turn.
All right, let's dive into how her delivery actually unfolded, because y'all, it gets real. Listener discretion is advised. So tell us exactly about the birth. So you kind of told us about all of it leading up to it. Can you just walk us through the actual delivery of your daughter?
Yeah. So like I said, we'd been there from it was a Sunday afternoon. I got the epidural Monday, by I think it was like 6 a.m. on Tuesday. It was like, it's going to be go time. And I'd gone through like the really painful, I was vomiting, I was shaking. I was just like having every sort of reaction, like, that I know a lot of women have right in the moment of being in so much pain in the epidural. I'd got like a little bit of sleep, and finally it was go time, right? but we went through the process. I remember pushing maybe 3 or 4 times, and then things got scary for us because I didn't know in the moment what was happening. I just heard, I think it was code blue, and the lights go on, something start flashing, and we're pushing. And I remember saying like, I can't anymore. And the nurses being like, you have to keep pushing. And Sam being like, you have to keep pushing. And I remember feeling incredibly exhausted. It'd just been such a long, it seemed like forever from Sunday to Tuesday morning at this point. And at one point, they scream some code and it's just, the room fills up with people. And I think in that moment, I remember, and I don't really know why, maybe it was Sam's fear in his eyes, but like my reaction was to tell him that he could leave the room. Like I was like, whatever's happening, you don't have to be here. Like I had a moment of clarity to be like, whatever is happening right now, you don't need to be in the room. And he was like, no, I'm staying. And at that point, a nurse literally jumps on me and starts pumping my stomach. And I know that there's like some sort of oil involved because I remember seeing the bottle. And then somebody on top of me pumping my stomach. And, obviously Sam's just like panic, but I just kept telling him like, you don't have to be here. You don't have to be here. He didn't leave, obviously, but the pumping of the stomach. And then it seemed like forever before we finally heard the cry. It did feel like forever. And I still didn't know what happened. Like they took the baby and Sam walked away. And I feel like it was like minutes and minutes of them before I don't remember it felt like forever before they even brought the baby to me. Now I understand, right, that what happened was that her shoulder got stuck, right? And they were checking on the baby. I think she got stuck on the left-hand side. So they were checking on her arm and her ear. But what I didn't understand in the moment was exactly why it happened. I just knew that she got stuck and that the room filled up and there was doctors. And then it seemed like forever before they could bring her to me and she was on my chest. And then eventually, I think a nurse and a doctor walked in and explained to us exactly what happened. But we were just so terrified because, I will never forget like the image of like a nurse being on top of me pumping my stomach because I'm just like, I don't think that this is the way it's supposed to go. And it was just, but also like the speed at which because the hospital was like a ghost town during COVID, right? There wasn't people just walking around the hallways all the time. And to feel like we were so alone in the hospital almost felt like the whole weekend, at least in this part of the hospital, to like it filling up with, I feel like it was 20 people in the room. And Sam and I just like couldn't wrap our head around like how quickly, which was a great right sign of the team that was available. Like it filled up within seconds, the room. Everyone, working on their own things and so many people surrounding me, surrounding the baby, surrounding Sam. And that was just, it was crazy. And sometimes I feel like I block it out. And then sometimes I'm like, no, I remember very vividly somebody being on top of me. The oil bottle is like such like a vivid memory for me. And like the words that I chose to say to Sam, which was like, you don't have to see whatever this is, right? Like whatever's happening right now.
Wow. First of all, can we just pause and hold space for what Perlita went through? That moment when everything shifts and you realize the birth isn't going according to plan, it's terrifying. And she handled it with so much strength and grace.
Yes, that part where she said they screamed a code and the room filled up with people, that really hit me. As providers, we all know what that means. But as a birthing person, that is an important moment of deep vulnerability and fear.
And for those who are listening and may not be familiar, let's talk about what a shoulder dystocia actually is. A shoulder dystocia is a birth emergency. It occurs when the head is delivered, then one of the baby's shoulders gets stuck behind the mother's pubic bone. It's rare, occurring in about 3% or less of all deliveries in the United States. But when it happens, it requires quick action.
Absolutely. And there's no way to predict it with 100% certainty. But certainly there are some risk factors. These include a larger baby, also known medically as macrosomia, gestational diabetes or diabetes of pregnancy, having a history of a shoulder dystocia in a prior birth, or something called CPD, cephalopelvic disproportion. That's when the birthing person's pelvis aren't a good fit for a vaginal delivery. But here's the thing, even without any of these risk factors, shoulder dystocia can still occur.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important that your provider is trained to recognize it and act fast. Once we suspect shoulder dystocia, there are specific maneuvers we use to help free the shoulder safely. The most common is called McRoberts maneuver. This is where we bring the mother's legs up and back to widen the pelvis. We also might apply suprapubic pressure to help dislodge the shoulder, which is what Perlita describes.
And in some cases, we try to deliver one of the baby's arms by putting our hand inside to grab it, or use a maneuver to rotate the baby, or even try to reposition the birthing person on hands and knees to create more space. And the goal of this is to relieve the shoulder and safely deliver the baby without causing harm to the baby or the birthing person.
And when you hear Perlita describing that moment, the tension, the shift in the room, you realize how critical those next seconds and minutes are. This is why skilled, responsive care matters.
Yes, and also emotional support, because even after a safe outcome, the moment can leave trauma, and we have to talk about that too.
Which is why we're so grateful to Perlita for sharing her story. It's not easy to revisit something that's that intense, but by doing so, she's helping others understand, prepare, and feel less alone. So let's get back to Perlita and see what she decided to do in her next pregnancy.
Like you had like a wonderful team that like just sprung to action and really like mobilized the forces. So I mean, I think you kind of alluded to this, like it seems like there wasn't much communication necessarily happening to you directly when this was all happening. But do you remember if the team was communicating with you directly during the situation? And then also like what that recap conversation was after all this event had happened? I don't feel like there was any communication happening. Like I remember, the sides of the beds going down, the pumping happening, but like there was no words being exchanged, at least not with me, right? Or I don't even think with Sam, right? I think it was all within them, within the team. And like I said, it wasn't even until like after she was given to us that we understood exactly what had happened. I didn't understand. Besides them telling me you need to keep pushing, like you can't stop pushing, I didn't understand really, what more that I could be doing in the moment. I guess, the only thing I could do was to keep pushing, right, and to like not lose focus in that moment. But there was not a lot of like here, and maybe truthfully, I probably wouldn't have been able to handle it if they were telling me what was going on truly in that moment. That we just went with it, right? Guards down, bed, like, the pumping began and we just kind of went with whatever needed to happen. And then in the aftermath, they explained, what had happened and that they were going to be checking her eye, the side of her eye, because she was pretty swollen on that side. And like in the days after, she got a little bit of an eye infection, and that was like solved for really quickly with an antibiotic. They were going to need to check her hearing on that side, and then obviously her arm, and be extremely careful with that side for her arm. And truthfully, I think it was best case scenario, like because it was such a simple path forward. Like she didn't have any permanent nerve damage, anything permanent, nothing, and they did have to explain to us that this could be the case, and we still needed to wait and see what the damage could be, but that would be the focus over the next X amount of time. So I appreciated that much. I think truly, like when we could talk about this too, like where I was more surprised was how much I didn't, I had OB follow-ups, but I didn't know until my second baby, for example, that there was a chance that this could happen again, that it was actually maybe something with like my anatomy, right? Or like I just assumed that this was like this random thing that happened maybe because I didn't push hard enough, because I stopped pushing. I didn't realize that because it happened before, it could happen again. I think that was truly the most surprising part once we were, and to be fair, like the doctor told me at my very first appointment the second time, but that threw me for a loop because by the first appointment, they were like, you should strongly consider a C-section. And that just was, and again, you heard like I was never super tied to what I did or didn't want to do. I'm happy that I got to experience a vaginal birth despite it being so scary. And I was really thrown for a loop when they were like, consider the C-section by appointment 1 for my second baby. But I was always open to doing what was best. I did talk to Kamisha a lot about like, should I not? But like, I was always open to doing what was the best thing for the baby and like what would decrease the likelihood. But that was something that totally surprised me. Cause like I said, I just thought it was a random thing that happened because maybe in that moment, the way I was pushing, the way I was positioned, something was not right. I didn't realize that the connection to the likelihood that it would happen again.
So walk us through that, right? Like emotionally, how were you feeling, right? Because you had this kind of traumatic first experience and now you're pregnant again. And like, how are you feeling? Were you able to really process what happened with your daughter when you went into your second pregnancy? Like what was going through your mind during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not ashamed to say like that the birth terrifies me. I mean, truly, even like the second time around, like the C-section was equally as terrifying for me. And like I was extremely nervous and had a lot of anxiety around it. But like the second time, it was mostly like, I was scared. And then I think it went from like being very scared to like also just being very confused as to how I did not realize that this was something. But again, maybe ignorance is bliss, just like in the moment that I didn't know what was happening, when they were pumping my stomach exactly, that the second, when we were planning for a second baby, it never crossed my mind, for example, that it could happen again with a second baby. So, and it was a complete shock once we got to the doctor that it could happen again. And I started to ask more questions. Well, then why? And they explained kind of, that the cavity maybe is not big enough. And for example, Xiomara, my daughter, was actually a small baby at 6 pounds, 7 ounces. So they were like, oh, so she was small. So this happened with a very small baby. The likelihood that your baby, we didn't know the gender yet, would be bigger is kind of high. So you do need to strongly consider a C-section. And it wasn't even like at that point, it was also like a very quick, like strongly consider you need to be doing a C-section. And then obviously a few appointments after the blood work. I'm older, so we found out pretty early after with blood work, what we were going to have, and it was a boy. So then kind of the doctor doubled down on like, it's even a greater chance that this is going to be a bigger baby. Again, like, let's start booking, like, let's pick a date for this C-section, right? Let's plan for this, and that it was just more like coming to terms with the fact that I don't think that it wasn't going to happen otherwise. And not that I was tied to doing it one way or another. I also think just like the lack of optionality got to me, right? Like, oh, it doesn't seem like I have an option here, which was probably the harder thing to get by, and I was really afraid for the truthfully, like the recovery. I didn't love the vaginal birth recovery. The C-section really scared me just because, again, going back to my mother who had never had a C-section, my sister at that time she's not had a C-section, right? So I'd not known too many women with C-sections. And I was worried because I have a toddler. And so this idea that like, my daughter had just turned 3 once I delivered the second baby. When can I hold her? How can I move? We had just moved into a 2-story home. And like the bottom room was reserved for like my in-laws or my parents who were going to be staying and helping. And like, I was going to need that room now because I wouldn't be able to immediately go up the stairs. So these are all the things that like, it sounds kind of like trivial, right? To be like worried about where I was going to sleep. But like, it was like, these are all the things that were going through my mind that like, I have a kid who like needs me to put her down still. That room is upstairs. I'll need to be downstairs. I want to be able to hold my child. Like, I have to be super careful with the C-section. So it was just, those are all the things that I didn't think that I would have to plan for. And I did. So that was, it just deviated from what we thought was going to happen.
Based on everything that you experienced, how do you feel like this has shaped your perspective on labor, delivery, and like the healthcare system?
Yeah. I mean, I think truthfully, just like the person that I am, I try to remain like as grateful as possible, right? Like that first experience was so scary, but I'm so grateful that everything turned out right and correct, right? And like that we were informed. My second, the C-section I found to be terrifying, to being in that room, even though it was planned and we got to go in, we were in there by 4 a.m. and we had my parents over the night before, like everything was so planned, right? But it's sitting in there in the surgery room before my husband could come in, for the epidural, like that, the moment of being by yourself in a cold room, sterile room, like that was too much for my mind. That was just racing of all the things that like could happen, right? And now with like a toddler, like that just amplified, right? But and then on like the follow-up care, I think it was a lot of like I found myself like through my second pregnancy, which is like I wish I would have known. Like you're right. Like there's so many moments of I wish I would have known, or like I wish that would have been fully explained to us. And I feel like those are the conversations that happened a lot, like in my second pregnancy. Like that wasn't explained to me. I wish I would have known more about this. And, I probably would have gone down the total rabbit hole of what happens when your child has a shoulder dystocia if you're trying to get pregnant again. Again, a blessing or a curse, because I probably, would have spent hours and hours trying to figure out what that meant for trying to get pregnant the second time. I remember being like even confused why they were asking me how it happened with my first and the shoulder dystocia. And is it my daughter okay now? And were there any lasting impacts? And I was just like, why are we talking about this right now? And then it all, made sense when they were like, this could happen again. And my mind was just blown.
Perlita brings up some interesting points. So let's talk about what can happen after a shoulder dystocia, not just in the delivery room, but in the days, weeks, and even years to follow.
Yes, shoulder dystocia is a situation that can have lasting effects for the baby. In the short term, babies may experience injuries, like something called a brachial plexus injury. This is damage to the nerves that control the arm and the shoulder. This can cause weakness or limited movement in the baby's arm. However, most of the cases resolve over time. This is something that you definitely want to discuss with your pediatrician.
For birthing people, short-term effects might include severe perineal tearing. So that's a vaginal laceration that goes from our vagina to the rectal area. postpartum hemorrhage, or even feelings of guilt or trauma, especially if they didn't fully understand what was happening in the moment.
And that's so real. The emotional impact is often overlooked. Even with a healthy outcome, many birthing people carry anxiety or fear into future pregnancies. That's why processing the experience with trauma-informed care is just as important as the physical recovery.
Now, when we talk about planning for a subsequent pregnancy, a previous shoulder dystocia comes into play. It doesn't mean you can't have a vaginal birth again, but your care team will want to review your full history. This is including the baby size, the status of diabetes, how the dystocia was managed the last time, and any other complications that may have occurred.
Right. And in some cases, especially if the baby is expected to be larger or the prior dystocia was severe, your provider might recommend a planned C-section. But that's not automatic. It really depends on your individual risk factors and your preferences.
The key is informed decision-making. You deserve to understand the risks, the options, and be a part of that planning conversation, not just handed a plan without explanation.
And let's not forget, you're allowed to ask for support, counseling, or even a debrief session with your provider after a traumatic birth. You don't have to carry that alone.
Perlita's story shows us that birth complications don't define you, but they do deserve to be acknowledged, understood, and respected in your future care.
Exactly. So whether you've experienced a shoulder dystocia or you're supporting someone who has, know this: healing is possible, and you have options for next time. Now let's see what advice Perlita would like to leave us with.
So then, based on your experience, what advice would you give other women who might face complication or have faced complications during their labor and delivery?
I think the key is asking so many more questions. And like that's something I could just work on in all aspects of my life. Like ask more questions, right? Like ask more questions. Do not resort to your own research. Don't go down that rabbit hole. Like too much of it, right? Like there is a medical professional for a reason, right? And Google will have you thinking that anything and everything is true. Ask as many questions as you need to, but also don't go and try to solve your own things just using Google as a doctor, because that's something that I also like need to work on. Like, and I wish, like I said, like knowing what I know now from my second pregnancy, and we hope to have a third. Like that is what I wish I would have done more of, right, when all this was happening. Like, what did that mean? Why did that happen? I never asked why that happened, or why could that have happened? With Xiomara, it never even crossed my mind to ask why it could. Granted, it was you have your first baby and everything has just turned upside down, but like I never even bothered to ask how that could have happened. Was it something about my body? What could I learn from it? Anything. Was just, it happened, and that was it.
Well, Perlita, I really appreciate you sharing your story with, the Birth Squad and, the listeners of the Birth Squad, because I think that by sharing it, we're going to have the opportunity to really help people prepare for something if this happens to them too. So I appreciate your vulnerability and, openness to talking about such a potentially traumatic experience that you went through. Is there anything else that you want to share with, the Birth Squad?
No, just that I think the work that you guys are doing is so important. It's really important. And I think it's like the community that you're building is super important. I do think like talking about this, in kind of this setting is super helpful to process. Also because, like I said, we would love to have a third at some point. And it's just like, just being able to talk about this out loud is super important. But also I just think that the stories that you're sharing is really important.
Well, thank you so much again, Perlita. What a great episode. And I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. Thank you all for listening. Perlita's story reminds us that even when birth doesn't go as planned, knowledge, support, and preparation can make all the difference.
And while shoulder dystocia is rare, it is real. And we believe that sharing stories like Perlita's helps take the fear out of the unknown and replaces it with awareness and advocacy. You deserve care that's responsive, respectful, and grounded in your safety.
Whether you're giving birth in a hospital, at home, or somewhere in between, the most important thing is that you feel seen, heard, and supported. Build a birth squad that knows how to show up for you, especially when things get hard.
We're so grateful to Perlita for her honesty, her courage, and for reminding us what it means to trust yourself, even in the toughest moments.
Thanks for listening, Birth Squad fam. We'll catch you next time. And until then, stay informed, stay empowered, and take care of each other.
So this is the last story of season 3. I am Dr. Bello.
And I'm Dr. Thomas. And we'll see you next season on the Birth Squad podcast.
But don't go too far away because we got some exciting projects cooking behind the scenes.
Following us on Instagram and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a thing, because big things are coming and we can't wait to share them with you.